Domenico Patassini. I'm a planner and I'm working at the Iuav University of Venice in the School of Doctoral Studies. I had a chance to come to Ethiopia in the beginning of the 80s for the preparation of the Addis Ababa master plan. At that time, University of Venice has been involved for the preparation of the plan, and there was a sort of competition between the universities of Rome, Florence, and Trieste. But an Ethiopian mission composed by the Ministry of Development and Housing and other technicians select the University of Venice as a main actor in the preparation of the plan. I had the opportunity to share this kind of experience in 1983 and 1985, and at the end of the plan, the manager of Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office asked me to stay more and to continue to collaborate for the implementation of the plan. A couple of years later, in 1987, a proclamation established a National Urban Planning Institute, and I had a chance to stay till 1991. So for many years. I had the opportunity, not only to follow the first phases of the implementation of the plan, but also to collaborate for the preparation of the plan in other towns all over the country. We work in many cities, including, of course, the capital, as well as in rural areas. Our attention was not only on, urban development, but also on urban-rural exchange. In fact, at that time, the master had also, a rural track concerning the food security and the early warning system policies. 1 year ago, in 2022, the Lease Lab publisher gave to the press the book that I'm presenting now, with the title Addis Ababa at the Roots of a Disputed Flower, that was edited by myself and a close friend of mine, Corrado Diamantini. We were former planning professors at the University of Trento and Venice in Italy. As I say at the opening, the book focuses on the Ethiopian capital of the 1980s, giving a detailed account of the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office experience financed by the Italian government. The text we are now presenting invites to watch the city in historical perspective, crossing 3 geopolitical cycles: the imperial, the socialist, and the so-called neoliberal, with a keen eye on its imminent future. And this urban planning experience that began 40 years ago, although is dated, politically conditioned and partially successful, might stimulate a discussion on Ethiopian capital city, but also and mainly, on its symbolic values and the ways in which it is administered today, underlining the importance of urban studies, land management and planning practices in a neoliberal world that seems to bend them, to its own ends. Within the current political cycle, two views or narratives clash today. The first, called internal colonialism, consider Finfinne, the Oromo name of the city, an ancestral land, forcibly taken over under the rule of Menelik II and progressively transformed into the city known as Addis Ababa. According to the second narrative, the King Menelik II and his wife Taitu decide to transfer the capital from Ankober to Entoto I and Entoto II, or first and second, that were ancient settlements with archaeological evidences, and then to Filoa and Finfinne. Based on such account, the aim was to revitalize an enigmatic and symbolic place, rediscovering Berera, that was a lost Middle Age medieval city, along with other old cities in the islands like Badeke, Sire, and others. But whatever the narrative, the contemporary Addis Ababa belongs to the last historical cycle, which began at the end of the so-called era of princes and with the onset of the conflictual Amara supremacy. For more than a century, Addis Ababa has been the engine of Ethiopia's urban development, embodying three state models, the imperial, the socialist, and the federal, as I said before. The city has benefited from the interaction between traditional and modern ways of life, as well as very intense urban and rural exchanges. A nexus, let's say, that is acknowledged by a rich tradition of urban and rural studies and by a planning experience that is unmatched in African cities. Today, Addis Ababa is losing the primacy not only in terms of population size, but also in terms of economic and cultural roles. The primacy that it enjoyed, since its founding. Literally besieged, it has taken on a narcissistic stance in seeking a postmodernist image that has little to do with its history. The city has tended to devise the very social policies on labor, housing, service, and infrastructure with unsustainable and unfair ecosystemic effects. The book highlights the importance of not forgetting that behind the glitter of a skyscraper and street transformed into canyons and nervous streams, there is a living world of tradition and places, And as a planner, we can say that the urban future cannot disregard what's happening in the rural world. The book looks mostly at the 1980s in European calendar, and it's organized in 5 chapters. The glimpse they offer takes us on a unique journey. The first chapter, Addis Ababa, the gamble of an African city, this is the title of this chapter, explore back through of 90s, the city's changing phase, and a potential new urban agenda. The second chapter ponders modes of production evolution in Addis throughout the 20th century. The third offers an overview of modernization process in the 80s with a focus on continuity of tradition that is recognized, as energy rather than mere inertia or as inescapable historical delay. The last two chapters explore the main planning cultures and their contact rationale behind, from the city's modern foundation at the end of 19th century till the 1980s, including, of course, the 1983-85 master plan experience. So two original notes accompany the last chapter, written by the two project managers of the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office, Professor Tekeste Haderon, previous rectors of Asmara University, now 84, and Professor Paolo Ceccarelli, at the time rector of Iuav University of Venice in Italy. Iuav means Institute of Architecture. Now he's 90 years old and is still managing the International Laboratory of Architecture and Urban Design, the ILAUD, that has been founded in 1976 by a famous architect and planner, Italian architect and planner, Giancarlo De Carlo. Tekeste Haderon provide unpublished information of the Ethio-Italian agreement to implement an expensive and original cooperation project few years after the law against famine in Africa was approved by the Italian parliament. The case that shows the effectiveness of a joint management approach conducted with moral integrity, depth, breadth, and originality of urban and rural studies involving almost 70 experts. Paolo Ceccarelli's short contribution spotlights the contact between different cultures and mutual collaboration. At the beginning of the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office adventure, he warned all the Italian staff against optimism and romanticism, laying aside the tragic meaning of life. His gentle invitation encouraged overcoming the mood known as mild Africa in Italian, a sort of African blues which swung between feeling of superiority and desire for innocence, an obvious and ambiguous colonial legacy, we can say. In 1983, on Christmas Day, he sent a very strong message to all the Italian experts working there at the time, giving Samuel Johnson's book, The History of Raselas, Prince of Abyssinia, as a gift. The planning experience thus became an opportunity to experiment and learn. An Italian book version was edited 30 years ago, in 1993. We could say its anniversary now, taking a cue from the experience of the 7th master plan of Addis Ababa. The title of the 1993 book, published by Franco Angeli in Milan, in Italy, was Addis Ababa, Village and Capital of a Continent. The term village was not meant to demean, quite the contrary. At that time, the city could be captured, with a glance. It was still recognizable by its river basins, by its urban clusters and historic landmarks. It stretched quietly, along the gentle slope from Entoto mountain to Kaliti and Bischoff-to corridor. The city thrived thanks to its intense and lively relationship with the surrounding countryside. The form of settlement in the city reflected a state of affairs characterized by intense interaction among the traditional, the modern government and international sectors that shape the kind of urban-rural city brain, lining up the overall security conditions. Urban economic studies at the time regarded this interaction a peculiarity. Despite questionable pictures and forecasts outlined by some international institutions, many questions arise in this regard as reasons, as motivations of looking at the past. For instance, why come back to the early 80s planning experience when the city is so radically different? Its core now seems besieged by a potential circular city, and severe criticism of flawed urban planning prevails. Why focus on a planning experience today? For what kind of planning process? Comprehensive or operational, structural or strategic, social or political? Why face, and this is another question, why face the frightening conflict between planning, design and practice? Does it make sense to discuss such a topic, today, considering the plans that followed from 2003 and 2017? Or to look at the new envisaged Oromo city, the Shagar project that is going full steam ahead, while very little is actually known about its rationale, despite or beside, let's say, demolitions and displacements. And all that behind the recent agreement between the municipality of Addis Ababa and the Oromia administrative regions. So these are all questions that can, let's say, motivate, or we can say also actualize, a discussion on this book. It is worth noting that, in urban Ethiopia, there is a striking and growing conflict between planning and land management. Planning often appear as mere institutional fiction, and in fact is sidelined, while land management increases both absolute and differential rents, in urban context, creating some tensions even within real estate domain. The absolute rent is related, of course, to the title deeds and to the land ownership system, while the differential rent are more or less related, let's say, to the urban growth dynamic. Planning, with its theories, methods, techniques and practice, ends up falling into these contradictions. As land ownership is still public, appropriate use of land lease policy can be crucial to design and build a sustainable, equitable, and culturally open city. The Addis Ababa master plan tried to do that, becoming a general frame of transition from a centralized to a mixed economy, and for the application of incoming land lease. But in a short period of time, public administration seems, to have abdicated the constituent principle of law number 80 of 1993 and regional regulations that followed, to which the then young Dr. Abebe Kebede contributed with great generosity. To my opinion, Abebe Kebede, which was a very close friend of mine and passed away, last February, it can be considered as a father of the land lease policies. And on the designing of the proclamation number 80, it worked a lot, going around the world, comparing and assessing different land lease systems in South Africa, in South America, in Australia, in Europe, etc., etc. So it was really, we can say the architect or one of the architects of this new, let's say, land management device. At the beginning of 1990s, land was still considered a public good. We can say even more, a common good, not merely a market, good. And this is a principle whereby land economics falls into a frame of civic economics, which above all reaffirm, let's say, the unified intelligence of Eastern Africa community, their holistic, let's say, a cosmogonic, let's say, we can say, approach. The land lease policy was first of all considered as a sectoral tool that will have a great impact on economy, environment, and society. The tool was at that time mainly conceived to accompany the transition from a state economy to a mixed economy, not to support or create a free market, but to contain the market's cravings within an acceptable economic, social, and environmental benefit cost balance. What's more, the land lease policy was also a planning tool, not only a cadastral or fiscal device, useful to draw reliable land value maps linked to planning scenarios. To some extent, and considering the increasing domestic migratory and peri-urban pressures, the tool could also help manage urban-rural exchange. On this basis, the land lease policy, along with allotment and auction procedures, could not be designed and properly implemented without planning and scenario writing. Land prices should derive from land values, no doubt. A short transition and test period triggered many regional regulations at the beginning, but the original mechanism was unfortunately reversed. I remember that, with the master on urban regional planning for developing countries, in collaboration with Dr. Abebe Kebede, we made two tests, one in Makale and the second in Diredawa, trying, let's say, to integrate innovation with tradition, try to integrate the Rist Mesged Nabota, the book of right and places, with a modern and innovative geographical information system. Considering what has been discussed so far, it is highly unlikely for an urban planning process to be totally useless. In Ethiopia, in my opinion, there is much room for improvement in this regard. The plan is not just a portfolio of investments, of interventions. Of course, it can herald them, it can foresee them, and tie them into operational paths. But the plan cannot be merely that, you know. As an administrative tool, it serves to enrich urban discourse and pave the way for today's city. Based on these general premises, some reasons would motivate a return to the 1980s experience, as the book softly suggests. At the Addis Ababa master plan time, the city, its architecture and functioning had a different economic base and a peculiar pattern of urban-rural exchange. The project institutional building, from the cooperation agreement to the organization of the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office, was unique. Urban and regional studies based on an interdisciplinary approach converged towards synthetic frameworks, including experimenting modeling. So the Addis Ababa city development has been based on a regional model. The name was RECEFA, that means region, sector, and phases, for a 20 years period. Main aim of the model was to estimate population resource balance at regional level, starting from the performance of the rural environments. To do that, we try to estimate, the production, consumption, reinvestment, and improvement, let's say, of quality of life, to arrive at what we call the net market of agricultural surplus. That was the main input, for the rural development on one side, and on the other side, let's say, for the urban one. On the basis of the results of the model, we estimate the migratory pattern and the development of urban system as a whole. So the plan differed from its predecessors with its detailed pilot projects. There were many pilot projects, designed for the implementation, a proper implementation of the master plan, on low-cost housing, on women employment, environmental protection, dairy farms and horticulture, public transport services and mobility infrastructure. Nothing to do with with the last Chinese project, health, etc., etc. The plan designed, a pilot project of Ketena centers, considered the core of a multipolar city, and it defined also rules and guidelines. It was strategic and interscalar. Okay, we can divide the implementation period from 1986 to 2002 in three phases. The first phase, let's say, referred to the Addis Ababa Master Plan preparation, 83-85, where, I mean, a sort of safeguard device has been adopted by the implementation and follow-up unit. The expansion of a Hilton, for instance, that was projected by an American architect, Charles Warner, was discussed deeply, within the master plan office. Even the CMC project for high standard housing has been discussed, within the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office. At that time, the project manager was the architect Mario Ludovico, that was also, a member of the Master Plan staff. Then we have a second phase from 1985 to 1992, where key projects had been designed, and some activities also was continued with the National Urban Planning Institute that has been established in 1987. Then we have a last, let's say a third phase from the approval of the plan in 1994. Let's say in near perfect coincidence with the proclamation number 80 on land lease till 2002. Let's say that in the last period, many activities have been undertaken. The first one was related, let's say, to test projects, where land management was tightly connected to and with urban design. The inner ring road of the city has been operationally designed, and even the location of the new stadium. A very interesting housing cooperative project has been, let's say, developed in Nefasilk, financed by the World Bank. But what's more, at that time, a number of expansion and infill housing projects that have been, let's say, finalized for an area of 2,500 hectares, more or less, more than 50,000 plots, under, let's say, the project management of Demirleş, Gezaçev, and Abebe Kebede. The main, let's say, areas, expansion and infill areas interested by this project were Bole Bulbula, Macanissa, Keranio, Kotebe, Ayat, even Akaki Industrial Park, Lebu, Lafton, and even the ECA. The project has been supported by infrastructure and facility interventions, and also the activation of housing revolving fund. A very important aspect in implementing the project at that time was the fact that, the land was till 175 square meter was allocated freely, and while, land plot with a higher surface were allocated, let's say, through tender and auction. Let's say that the project of the new Sheraton was non in conformity, with the Fitber infill project that has been drawn by architect Armando Barb during the Addis Ababa Master Plan experience. The revision of the plan with the ORAMP office, with the help of GTZ, under, the management of architect Matteo Sasfao, that is now a PhD doctor at the Iuav University of Venice. He got, this title in 2022. Even that, let's say, revision activities can be considered as a part, of the implementation of the third phase. In conclusion, we can say that, the master plan helped, in establishing a new relation between planning and land management. At that time, an Addis Ababa land lease administration office has been established with a significant effect, for instance, on the municipal budget. Before, the budget was very, very, very low. you know, and starting applying land lease policy according, let's say, to the planning standard and planning, let's say, strategies defined by the plan, the municipal budget start, increasing significantly. And that help, to develop a discussion about the municipal administration reform that was based on two main principles. Let's say the major manager model. So there were two actors, let's say the mayor and the manager, the mayor of the city and the urban manager, and of course the identification of 10 sub-cities. The 10 sub-cities were of course related to the concept of Ketena that, was introduced by the Addis Ababa Master Plan project. So let's comment very briefly, the main reasons that are at the basis that motivate, this discussion on the 80s. Let's see the first reason. The city of the early 80s boasted a model of synergetic integration between modern and traditional activities. The city metabolized, in its daily, let's say, life, what with belated emphasis would be called lessons from informality, as recently illustrated by Felix Hazel and Bizarat Kifle. Its physical morphology was still sensitive to the environmental context, the urban-rural linkage and exchange. A very poor city, of course, in a poor country, but yet characterized by relatively limited inequalities, as confirmed by the first national census of 1984. If we compare the existing situation with the 80s, we can find that the inequality became worse and worse from different perspectives, of course, not only in terms of income. The Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office was an institutional experience that followed a mirroring learning process among a group of local and foreign experts. The experts in this planning experience were long and short term, depending on the, let's say, planning demand and the contingencies. And this is a second reason that motivates, let's say, the discussion of the 80s experience. It was a sort of ivory tower, apparently unrelated to actual conflict, within a top-down institutional and management game. The Master Plan Project Office operated with many degrees of freedom, as it acted within a legal and planning framework in the process of being defined, after the Derg has taken power. The dictatorial context gave degrees of freedom in their search for legitimacy and willingness to redesign a planning and a legal system. Therefore, it was, in my opinion, only apparently a paradoxical situation. From the cooperation agreement to the organization of the planning office, the institutional design procedure was unique and original, as mentioned by the two project managers in the opening lines of the book's last chapter. The city was considered as a component of a wider mechanism of urban-rural exchange. And despite its top-down approach that was inevitable in a system with a centralized and one-party economy, the planning process involved multiple institutions, administrations, agencies, and ministries. The Master Plan Office boasted an unprecedented organization with experienced local staff and expatriates adopting, and this is the most important aspect, a dialogic approach. The planning process and outcome derived from a continuous and sometimes conflictual internal dialogue. The final master plan proposal did not arise, let's say, from a set of predetermined hypotheses. One of the critical points was the relationship between the implementation and follow-up unit and the metropolitan city municipalities. Although such an issue, that we can call it a missing link, eventually gave rise in 1987 to the National Urban Planning Institute with an ad hoc proclamation. We can also say that the establishment of the Addis Ababa Master Plan Project Office triggered a new season of urban and regional studies, at the time still very tepid and limited to occasional contributions. And this is a third, let's say, general reason, that I would like to mention. The new studies were interdisciplinary in nature and converged towards synthetic frameworks as required, by the planning process that had begun. But let me mention an additional reason. The master plan is not a mere blueprint. Not should it be considered according to a narrow rationale of statutory plans. The legal and regulatory frame of reference was so weak at that time that the planning process itself became a source of new rules, including the planning law, providing guidelines and fostering urban design experimentation. Specifically, it suggested a number of key projects that I mentioned before as design and implementation tools. They were not considered, independent projects, but part of a general planning rationale. In other words, the master plan process ended up, taking on a constructive value. It was even the first plan that sought to integrate economic dimensions with physical, functional, and spatial factors, adopting an interscalar operational approach. There were the regional level, the metropolitan, and the local or municipality level, integrated, one to each other. The plan was a specific administrative experience in the city history, and not simply, let's say, an academic or technical exercise, as claimed by, let's say, some national or foreign critical authors. I mean, the criticism was even, to some extent acceptable, in a sense that the institutional building design that accompanied the preparation of the plan was weak to some extent. And we were considering, while finalizing the plan, and even during its approval, that to be effective, the master plan will require, a better institutional design. In conclusion, looking at today's actual city landscape, in my opinion, the text, might sound toxic due to its language, a form of Abyssinian colonialism, you can say, and intoxicated, by an outdated alliance forged by ex-colonizers, the Italian center-left government led at that time by the Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, and the Derg regime. If you get to the bottom of things, it is only appearance. Those who share the Addis Ababa master plan experience, Amhara, Tigrayan, Eritrean, Oromo, Italians, Hungarian, British and Germans, cherish the pleasant memory of a constructive and exploratory environment, unaffected by what happened afterwards. It was not a compulsory interactive coexistence of staff, but a small community of urban design practices. That's all.